So I'm driving my grandfather's rebuilt 1951 Ford across the back pasture when I slam the brake, a 15T metal skeleton, blinking and humming towers above my windbreak adorned with an honorable HOA sticker. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't agreed to anything regarding the windbreak. It's not just trees, it's the line that kept my family's trap hidden for over a century, and they just triggered it. Now, before I get too personal, allow me to provide some context. This is not a typical residential area with prefabricated houses and recently laid sidewalks. This is legacy land. My family has owned this patch of prairie since before the word zoning even existed. You know how most people pass down heirlooms or photo albums? We pass down landlines, not the phone kind, the kind that gets lawyers excited and city planners nervous. And right now I'm staring at a blinking tower that someone, presumably the same someone who once fined me for aggressive lawn tractor behavior, decided to erect in the middle of my private windbreak. Like she was planting a flag, I pulled up to the base of the thing, engine rumbling low, and climbed out. They bolted the tower to a concrete base, about 4 ft wide, fresh bolts, chalk dust still coated the bolts. I walked a slow circle around it, spotting the little plastic HOA sign zip tied to one of the supports. It read, "Public Signal. Extender placement approved." The words, "Improving neighborhood connectivity," were written in smaller letters beneath it. This is impressive, especially when you consider that the closest neighbor is half a mile away and requires crossing 2 fences to say hello. My windbreak is old, really old, back when soil blew like smoke through these parts. My great-grandfather planted rows of cedar and pine. That tree line isn't just pretty, it shields the old utility vaults, the emergency water tank, the concrete hatch we were told never to open, and most importantly, the reason no one has ever dared try to split or claim this land. It's the line that marks what's ours and what isn't. And now it had blinking lights on top and a little solar panel flapping like a kite on a pole. I drove straight to the house, stormed through the door, and grabbed the thick manila envelope marked for emergency use only from the filing cabinet, not because I thought this was the apocalypse, but because whenever someone screws with the windbreak, it tends to start a chain reaction. Inside the envelope were 4 things. The contents of the envelope included a dusty USB drive, a hand-sketched map, legal document with half of its words blacked out, in a photo of my grandfather standing next to a government man in a trench coat, shaking hands over freshly poured concrete. The base was made of freshly poured concrete. The person under the tower is the one I am referring to. I didn't even call first. I drove straight to the HOA office, a converted ranch-style house with fake brick siding and a plastic eagle mounted above the door. Of course, she was there. Karen, she is the president of the HOA, a self-proclaimed neighborhood integrator and the proud owner of the world's most condescending smile. She met me on the porch with her clipboard like I was the pizza guy delivering a complaint. "Jack," she said, nodding like she expected me to thank her, "we're thrilled to offer free public Wi-Fi access to our rural community. It's part of our new digital outreach plan." "You put it on my land," I said flatly. "Oh, we're certain it's within the public access buffer," she chirped. "It's just trees after all. My great-grandfather planted these trees. The trees are situated on private property." Karen didn't even blink. Karen didn't even blink. "According to our partnership agreement with Signal Rain Technologies, we were authorized to place towers on any underutilized parcel within HOA bounds. The board approved the motion at last month's meeting, I'm not in your HOA, you're adjacent to it. She said like that somehow gave her jurisdiction. The system flagged your parcel as community enhancing. I stared at her. Community enhancing. Well, if you'd ever attended the monthly meetings, Jack, you could have voiced these concerns before implementation. Her smile was taut, like she thought she'd already won. I walked back to the truck in silence, heart pounding, not from anger but from the kind of dread that starts low and cold. This was due to the memory of my grandfather's words. That vault isn't for us, it's for when someone gets greedy, and greedy had just parked a blinking tower on top of it. Later that night, I did what any self-respecting rancher with access to a cousin who practices law would do. I called Lindsay. She works in Denver, specializes in land use, and eats HOA presidents for breakfast. I sent her photos. She asked 3 questions. Third one made my skin crawl. Did they drill into the cap? I told her yes. She was silent for a beat. Then she said, Jack, sovereign infrastructure protection legally s. Eels that cap. Puncture occurred. They did. She exhaled. Like I just told her. A toddler swallowed uranium. Then they just made it federal. I barely slept. At sunrise I walked the tree in. The windbreak had always felt quiet, sacred, and solid, but now it buzzed. Literally, that tower made this place feel violated. I stopped at the edge where the grass changed color and the soil was a touch darker. That's where the hatch was. It was still flush with the earth, but the bolts surrounding it appeared fresh. Someone seemed to have tampered with it. This likely occurred during the tower's installation. What's the most challenging aspect? I hadn't even noticed. I had been away for 2 weeks, clearing out flood debris on the lower property line. During that time, someone wielding a clipboard and an exaggerated sense of authority had crossed the boundary my family had drawn generations ago. I headed back toward the house, dialing Lindsay again, and told her we needed to trigger the clause. This clause was specifically included in Grandpa's will. This document initiated an automatic review whenever a third party entered the protected zone without formal written consent. She asked me to go to the barn, grab the red envelope hidden behind the old feed bins, and not to open it until the agents arrived. Agents? I asked. You'll see. But before I could even reach the barn, I noticed something strange near the tower. 2 men dressed in safety vests were climbing the tower and tinkering with the wires. They weren't affiliated with the HOA, no badges, no ID. One of them glanced toward me, startled, then dropped a screwdriver and climbed down fast. That's when I noticed the logo on their truck. It wasn't telecom, it was federal. As soon as I saw the federal seal on that truck, my stomach lurched, as if it already knew something I didn't. It wasn't flashy, just a plain government-issue white pickup with a discreet black decal on the door. Department of the Interior. That alone might not have meant much to the average neighbor, but out here where land represents not only dirt but also legacy, jurisdiction, and at times battleground for conflicts, that logo meant one thing: someone higher up had taken an interest, and whatever Karen thought she was doing with her shiny tower and her HOA stickers, it just got very real. I didn't approach the guys right away. Instead, I leaned against the side of the barn and watched. They weren't acting like contractors. There were no informal coffee breaks or idle conversations about signal strength. They were taking measurements, documenting angles, and inspecting the soil near the concrete base. One of them took a long metal rod and gently tapped around the hatch area, the very spot my grandfather always warned us not to disturb. The other guy marked something in a ledger, nodded, and snapped a photo. I walked up slowly, arms visible. Casual, they noticed me but neither. Flinch, that confirmed it, it wasn't their first experience. Morning, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Morning, the older one replied. Are you Jack Mitchell? I nodded. He held up a laminated ID card and flashed it. Briefly, Agent Calloway, we received an alert regarding infrastructure interference on registered sovereign trust land. You're the listed custodian under Mitchell Land Holdings, correct? Yeah, and I haven't filed anything yet. You didn't have to, he said, glancing toward the tower. The moment they drilled through that vault cap, the system tripped an auto report flag. System linked it to a legacy infrastructure alert. I just blinked at him. The presence of legacy infrastructure became apparent to me. Decades after his death, my grandfather successfully wired this place into a system that continues to function. That stubborn old man had prepared for everything. Calloway saw my expression and gave a small smile. It's rare we get a live one. Most people don't even know what's under their land. You're lucky. Your family built this, right? I looked at the tower again. What will happen next? That depends on how deep they went. We'll need to activate containment protocols if they breach the aquifer feed. If it's just the hatch cap, we document it and prepare an injunction. How does the incident affect the HOA? Calloway's smile dropped. We'll deal with them. The other agent came over and quietly handed Calloway a small USB stick. He nodded and slipped it into his vest pocket. We've got what we need. I recommend you stay off this portion of the land for now. We'll file a containment perimeter request. I didn't argue. I knew what that meant. They were about to rope off my land for a federal investigation. However, the irony lies in the fact that this action was taken to safeguard me from the potential harm that the HOA had recently caused. Later that afternoon, Karen showed up again. This time she wasn't alone. Two other HOA board members stood behind her like backup dancers at a community theater production of McBTH. She marched right up my gravel drive, plastic folder in hand, and started waving papers before I could even say hello. We've received complaints, she said briskly. Apparently there's been unauthorized federal activity reported near the tower. Oh, you mean the agents? Yes. That's because your team drilled into a sovereign vault, I said. Congrats, you have recently nationalized your HOA project. Her smile faltered slightly. We acted under the full authority of the HOA charter and within the expanded utility zone. I folded my arms. That's funny because according to the Department of the Interior, you just violated a century-old land trust agreement. That tower it's sitting on emergency infrastructure registered with the National Aquifer Protection Program. The shorter board member, a guy I'd never seen without his golf visor, blurted, "What the hell is an aquifer protection program?" Karen silenced him with a look, then turned back to me. "We'll be consulting with our legal team, but understand this, Jack, your non-participation in HOA meetings has consequences. You could have resolved this issue if you had simply attended the vote." "There was no vote," I said. "You faked a recording and misrepresented my property as public. That's not a vote, that's fraud." Her mouth opened and closed like she couldn't quite believe I had the audacity to talk back. Then she turned, whirled around, and departed without uttering another word. But I saw her hand tremble as she stuffed the folder back into her tote bag. That was the first crack in her armor, and it wouldn't be the last. By sundown, yellow tape had gone up around the windbreak, and a small team of federal contractors was installing motion sensors on tripods near the vault. Evidently a shallow Puncture in the cap triggered a contamination risk assessment. This required water testing, soil analysis, and a significant amount of expensive official paperwork, none of which I was responsible for filing. What's the best part? The cost of the investigation would fall on the entity that initiated the unauthorized modification. In other words, the HOA would bear the cost. Lindsay called again that night. After conducting some research, she discovered that the HOA's charter hadn't undergone any changes since 2007. Even better, their so-called utility expansion clause remains unenforceable without the signature of every adjacent landowner. The clause is not legally enforceable without the signature of every adjacent landowner. They never got a signature from anyone. They don't just owe you damages, she said. They're going to owe the federal government an explanation. They will also owe the federal government a substantial amount of money. I stood on the porch staring out at the blinking red light on top of the tower, thinking about my grandfather. He'd predicted something like this would happen. Perhaps it wasn't a Wi-Fi tower, but rather an instance of overreach, arrogance, the slow creep of entitlement masquerading as community improvement. Was evident. He had built the land's defenses so quietly and subtly that no one noticed them until they tripped over them. The next morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a Signal Rain rep, the same company that partnered with the HOA. He sounded nervous, apologetic. I wanted to discuss alternative arrangements and possibly negotiate a retroactive access easement. I asked him to email my lawyer. Then, just as I was about to hang up, he said something that chilled me. Just to clarify, we didn't actually initiate the tower installation. The HOA approached us. However, a third party filed the permit on their letterhead. That froze me. Could you provide the name of the third party? We are currently attempting to confirm the details, but the digital form lists someone named L. Murdoch. I didn't say anything. The hesitation was primarily due to my familiarity with his name, and he wasn't from the HOA. He was from the county. His presence implied that the situation extended beyond Corinne's boundaries, way deeper. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of fear, but because my brain would shut off. The name L. Murdoch kept bouncing around in my head like a bad echo. Lawrence Murdoch, county zoning liaison, paper pusher turned power addict. I hadn't heard that name since the land dispute hearings 3 years ago when he tried to reclassify half the valley for multi-use development without so much as a heads up to the landowners. He was slick, bureaucratic, and always 5 moves ahead unless you caught him with his hand in the cookie jar. Unbeknownst to me, a forged HOA permit linked his name to a federal investigation on my land. The more I thought about it, the less the scenario looked like Corinne's usual flavor of entitlement, and the more it started to reek of something coordinated. By sunrise, I was already at the county clerk's office. Normally, I'd avoid the place like the plague, but this wasn't a normal week. I asked to see any public records regarding the tower installation, including permits, filings, variances, whatever they had. The lady behind the desk, a sweet woman named Donna, who's known my family since I was in diapers, gave me that tight-lipped smile people use when they know something's off but can't quite say it. She handed me a printout of the digital permit request. The signature line had Lawrence Murdoch's name, no title. The only information available is the name. The filing date was 2 days before I even left town for the lower pasture. The attached file claimed that the property was an unclaimed buffer zone and voluntarily zoned under HOA Jurisdiction, the claim was clearly false, and yet someone had clicked approve. I asked Donna who processed it. She hesitated. Murdoch himself manually overrode that submission, but you didn't hear me say it, said it was pre-cleared through an interdepartmental agreement. She lowered her voice. Jack, there is no interdepartmental agreement that would have required the council's approval. I thanked her, took a copy of the documents, and walked out into the sun, feeling that old, slow, burning anger that only shows up when someone messes with your family's name. The situation wasn't just about Karen anymore. The culprit was someone using the HOA as a cover to get access to a chunk of land they legally couldn't touch, probably thinking no one would ever notice if it got quietly repurposed in the name of progress, except the land wasn't theirs, it was mine, and they'd built their precious tower right on top of a federal water vault, like they were installing Christmas decorations. Back at the ranch, Agent Calloway was still overseeing the cleanup around the tower. The investigation had moved into phase 2, which meant more federal vehicles, more equipment, and a very long roll of red tape. I showed him the permit printout and the signature. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. Murdoch's name came up once before, he said while examining the paper. He attempted to approve a utility corridor that passes through federal grazing land last year. He faced severe consequences for neglecting the environmental review. It looks like he's trying again, just using your HOA as the middleman this time. So, what now? Calloway looked up at the blinking tower. Now we find out who paid for the installation. If it wasn't the HOA directly, it seems that resources are being redirected. That'll tell us what they were really after. That same day, Lindsay emailed me a background report she pulled together in record time. The tower wasn't just a signal booster, it had secondary receivers, encrypted routing hardware, and high-capacity uplinks. Put simply, its intended use was not for public Wi-Fi. It was a relay point. It could be either surveillance or data extraction. Her email ended with a single chilling line. They didn't want your land, they wanted access. And suddenly it all made sense. My land sat on the highest point in the area. The tower's line of sight extended for miles. If someone wanted a hidden way to move data or tap into nearby systems, they'd need height, cover, and legal ambiguity. The HOA gave them 2 out of 3. Karen, likely clueless, handed them the third by claiming jurisdiction she didn't have. That night I drove the property line and followed the newly installed surveillance tape just to make sure everything was still secure. I spotted fresh tire tracks near the back fence where the windbreak thinned out, and the land dropped toward the dry creek bed. Not federal, not mine. I killed the headlights and coasted forward in neutral until I reached the edge. Parked behind a cluster of trees was a black SUV with the engine still warm. There was no one inside. I got out, flashlight in hand, and started scanning the area. That's when I saw the footprints, not boot prints like you'd expect from feds or ranchers, but sneakers, city shoes. Someone had been scouting, possibly watching, possibly waiting. I snapped photos of the vehicle, the tracks, and the angle facing the tower, and sent them straight to Lindsay and Calloway. The SUV vanished before sunrise. By the time the feds arrived, all that was left were the prints and a faint smell of gasoline. The next morning, the HOA sent out a community email blast. It was the usual passive-aggressive masterpiece, likely written by Karen herself. The subject line read, "Update on temporary service disruption." The body included phrases like "in partnership with local agencies" and minor misunderstandings regarding Land classification, I nearly choked on. My coffee when I got to the line about community heroism in the face of federal overreach. She really tried to spin it as if they were the victims here. However, the most shocking revelation emerged at the end. There will be an emergency meeting of the HOA location, the clubhouse agenda, discussion of legal strategy and reassessment of tow or replacement. I could feel the gears shifting. They were regrouping. They were probably hoping to regroup and find a new way to spin the narrative, but they had no idea how deep the hole had gotten. That afternoon, Calloway arrived with a thick file and a somber expression on his face. He handed it to me without word. Inside were satellite images, phone logs, and a funding trail that led straight from Murdoch's office to a shell company out of Nevada. And guess who signed the funding transfer? Karen. It wasn't just ignorance, it was collusion. Now it was considered a felony. The folder Calloway handed me felt heavier than it should have. The difference was not in weight, but rather in the consequences. I sat at the old kitchen table, the same one my grandfather used to write his ranch logs on, and flipped through page after page of confirmation. The documents included wire transfers, metadata, and company filings. All the evidence points directly to a suspicious Nevada LLC and Corinne's personal bank account. Neither the HOA fund nor any board-managed expense account is involved. Her account in Murdoch's name showed up in the same trail, less direct, but present. The way they'd done it was clever. The LLC posed as a rural broadband accelerator and funneled the funds through what appeared to be a tech grant application. Only the grant never existed. It was a cover to sneak in the tower disguised as a public benefit and position it exactly where they needed. On my windbreak on top of the infrastructure, no one was supposed to touch it. I sat back in the chair, staring at the grain of the wood table, letting it all settle in. The incident wasn't just another HOA power grab. This was a strategic funded operation wrapped in neighborhood nonsense to make it look harmless. Karen, despite her strict adherence to protocol, was well informed. Perhaps she didn't understand every technical detail, but she was well informed when she approved the fraudulent permit and conducted the emergency vote without the presence of her actual neighbors and Murdoch. He had been meticulously planning it, employing Corinne's personal grudge as the ideal cover. My land, my family's protected system had just been one more piece in a long con they assumed no one would notice, except I did, and now they had a problem. Add the federal team moved fast after that. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the clubhouse was crawling with quiet suits and shiny black shoes, not the kind you see at community barbecues. They didn't announce themselves at first. They just sat near the back while the board tried to calm a room full of confused homeowners with buzzwords and fake smiles. Corinne stood at the front, shoulders squared like she was still in control, talking about temporary miscommunication with government agencies and ongoing efforts to preserve property value. Then one of the agents stood up, held out a badge, and asked to speak with her privately. Her face went sheet white. I almost felt bad. Almost. I watched from the hall as they led her into the small office behind the main room. 5 minutes later, Murdoch arrived, clearly summoned in desperation. As soon as he stepped inside and spoke in a hurried and loud manner, they immediately asked him to sit down and wait. He didn't. Instead, he tried to leave. That's when 2 other agents stepped into the doorway. The message was clear. No one was going anywhere. I left before the end of it. I didn't need to see the rest. I'd seen enough. Back home, I pulled out the red Envelope from behind the old feed bin in. The barn, the one Lindsay told me not to open until everything was underway. Inside was one final piece of documentation, a notarized trust clause. Written by my grandfather himself, it stated that if any party, HOA or governmental, attempted to alter the sovereign trust zone without formal authorization or emergency declaration, the land ownership rights within a 4-mile radius would revert temporarily to the trust until the breach was resolved. It was written in the kind of ironclad legalese that no one born after 1950 seems to understand, and attached to it was a county seal from decades ago, signed during a time when my great-grandfather had more political sway than the mayor, which made it perfect. The clause meant that the land the HOA built their clubhouse on, the land they paved their parking lot on, and the green belt they proudly hosted their wine tastings in, all of it was now legally speaking in my hand. Lindsay filed the paperwork that same day. Callaway confirmed the reversion rights were valid, triggered by the tower breach and the forged permit. Within 48 hours, an official notice was nailed to the HOA clubhouse door stating that the property was under temporary trust control pending federal investigation and land rights arbitration. We closed the clubhouse. HOA operations were suspended. Correct. Faced charges for filing a fraudulent infrastructure permit, misusing HOA funds, and conspiring to interfere with federal property. Murdoch got it worse. The federal government doesn't like when you fake interdepartmental clearances. Someone raided his offices. His hard drive seized. I heard from Lindsay's contacts that he's facing a very long list of charges, including abuse of public trust and unlawful redirection of municipal grants. The tower underwent a meticulous dismantling process under federal supervision. We carefully jackhammered the foundation out of the soil. We examined the vault beneath it and confirmed its integrity. No contamination. There was no breach of the water table. The system my grandfather built, buried, hidden, and protected by generations, had survived the attempted theft. But the real beauty came later, when the HOA tried to reconvene without Karen, without their clubhouse, and without legal standing to operate on land now frozen under trust review. The board collapsed. They tried to vote in new members, but attendance dropped to nothing. Homeowners were furious, not only at the legal disaster, but also at how close they came to losing everything due to one woman's obsession with control. Someone found the fake emails, the edited meeting notes, and even a pre-written newsletter celebrating the new digital future she planned to send out right after the tower went live. She never got the chance. The final act of poetic justice came in the form of a letter from the telecom company, Signal Rain Technologies. Sent a formal apology, blaming a breakdown in communication with local leadership and requesting permission to remove any residual equipment. I replied with a single sentence: federal supervision must oversee the removal of all equipment, ensuring no contact with property owners, and they complied. A month later, the land was quiet again. The windbreak stood tall, untouched. The hatch was resealed and marked with a new federal sensor that would trip the system again if anyone so much as walked too close without clearance. I'd repainted the old Ford, fixed the back pasture gate, and started planting native grasses where the tower once stood. Sometimes neighbors still ask me what happened. I simply smile and remark, it turns out my trees were worth more than they thought, and every once in a while, when the wind shifts just right, I imagine my grandfather's voice in the rustle of those trees, low and satisfied. He anticipated the Outcome, he did not just build a trap. He didn't just build a trap, he built a legacy no one could steal, and they walked right into it.